Build One South Africa is calling for public access to the National Register of Sex Offenders. In the last decade, the total number of sexual offences peaked in 2012 and 2013 to about 60,900 cases. Joining us for more on this is BOSA Deputy Leader Nobuntu Hlazo-Webster. Good evening, Ms. Hlazo-Webster. Thank you very much for joining us on the programme. Just take us through your reasoning as a party as to why you believe it's necessary at this point that the public have access to the National Register of Sex Offenders.
Thank you so much for having us and for actually bringing this important conversation to the channel. So as it stands now, we have a number of measures that have been taken, by various, some non-profit institutions, civil society, and some by government in order to be able to fight the scourge of gender-based violence, but particularly also to fight violence against children as well. But we haven't done enough in terms of the preventative measures. Now, as it stands now, we have a situation where we often are able to talk about who the victim is, particularly those cases that become high profile and that are in the public. I always make an example of Uyinene Mkhwejane, where we all know who she is, but we then are not able to identify who was the perpetrator. Once a perpetrator is outside of prison and is back in society, we then have situations where you often have repeat offenders because there's no way of identifying them, particularly as it pertains to children. You then have people who, as just a public person, an ordinary citizen who has people coming into your home, you're not able to check and see these people coming into my home. Is anybody a previous perpetrator, and is anybody somebody who could be a risk to my child? Mm-hmm. So we're calling on, because we believe it is one of the preventative measures that we need to look at, one of the preventative measures that can be put in place in order to prevent further escalation of the issue of GBV and violence against children.
Now, Nobuntu, right now the list is open to institutions such as preschools, of course, schools, hospitals, specifically because the list only contains the names of offenders of sexual crimes against children and even people suffering from mental illness. So what are those who say it does in its current form serve the purpose that at least preschools and schools can at least share or view that specific list?
The reality is that preschools or schools are not the only place where children are. Mm-hmm. Children are in homes, children are in public spaces, and as caregivers and parents and guardians, you want to have some sort of access to a register like that in order to be able to protect your children. But it's not only children who are violated in this country. We have one of the highest rates of femicide in the world. We have one of the highest rates of gender-based violence in the world. So the scope needs to be extended in order to make sure that you have perpetrators of all sexual crimes on that register and that there's access to that register. Another issue is that even now, with those who exist, you've had a backlog in terms of making sure that you have those who have been prosecuted on the list. And that backlog also just needs to be brought to a point where it is up to date.
Mm-hmm, which is most certainly worrying. But then on the Constitution and the clear misalignment, as some have said, the Constitution, specifically Section 14, protects the offender's right to privacy. There's also the POPIA Act on the disclosure of personal information. So essentially, you have the privacy of offenders pit against the safety of potential victims. This clearly speaks of a misalignment that might need more than just a petition. I believe you have published a petition. Which bodies, though, have you been engaged with on this specific matter?
So, first of all, there's the reality that all proceedings that take place in a court of law are actually public. So the reality is that if you looked hard enough, if you had the access to the data, if you had the access to the devices, you can actually find who becomes prosecuted in various cases online. So that argument that it violates the privacy of those who have been found guilty doesn't hold, because that's information that actually is public. So that debate doesn't hold in that sense. But what we've also done is I've moved a motion in Parliament to have the issue debated in Parliament because we have been calling on the Department of Justice to look into the matter. And so I've moved a motion to have it debated in Parliament. There is quite a lot of support from other parties as well for the sexual offenders register to be made public.
And then on the petition itself, how has the reception been thus far?
So we have about 10,000 signatures on the petition as it stands now. And really for us, the petition was about making sure, we always say that we're about the 61 million South Africans, as Build One say. So for us, the petition was really about making sure that we have the voices of South Africans. And really, even, on social media platforms and in various media platforms, the response from South Africans, men and women, interestingly enough, has been that they want to see the sexual offenders register public. And so for us, that process was really just about getting the input and the voices of South Africans.
We've also posed a question to our viewers on this, if whether they want to have the sex offenders list made public. And it seems for now everybody has been saying they do want it made public. Nobuntu, thank you very much for your time this evening. That's BOSA leader, or rather deputy leader, Nobuntu Hlazo-Webster speaking to us.